hey, what are some factors leading to the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis? Well, one is the variability of the scores. You'll notice, and what we mean by that is the standard deviation in the population. Look up here on the top of the standard error term. If that number is swollen, that means the entire standard error, the standard deviation of the distribution mean, the standard deviation of the distribution of sample means will be swollen. So if the standard deviation is high, the standard error will be high. And again, that standard error is the standard deviation of the distribution of sample means. So the researcher would prefer that not be so swollen. They prefer a low number here, which would also mean the whole thing is a low number. And, if there's a ton of variability, it makes it harder to reject the null hypothesis because remember, this is the denominator term of the z-score equation. The other thing is the number of scores in the sample. We saw that. We had a crazy experiment that had only 4 participants, and we had one that had 256 and 144, some other crazy stuff. Plug in a big number down here. If I plug in a big number down here, like 144 or 256, this gets very small, right? This number gets smaller the larger the denominator gets. And when that thing gets very large, this number shrinks. And what happens? Z gets larger because this is the denominator term. So 2 things I want to leave you with. If the population data is really variable and this number is high, that undercuts, that makes it less probable that I'll reject the null hypothesis. I'd prefer a low number here. I'd prefer a high number here. The higher my sample size, all things equal, that's making it much more likely that I'll reject the null hypothesis because that shrinks this number, which makes the z-score larger. And for instance, let's take this one. This silly example from about the, what the heck was it? Sedator. I had 256 people here. Did that help reject the null hypothesis? Sure, absolutely. That swelled this number up big time because the standard error was very low. It was something over 256, and I forgot the exact number, right? Was something over the square root of 16, and I forgot what it was. But that large sample size helped us to reject the null hypothesis, even though the alpha was only 0.01. So again, all things equal, I would prefer that the variability be low if I were the researcher. I'd prefer that the n be high. Although we don't cynically chase large samples just to get statistical significance. We just don't do that because there's another thing that you sort of have to confess to. If I had a ton of participants, I could have statistical significance, but I would also may have to confess to a low effect size, what they call it, and we'll revisit that here in the next slide.